Talk, if you would, a little bit about health and burnout.
I adjusted the way that I interact with all the different platforms. I was just way too connected to all those platforms and to the audience.
How do you find someone for that president role?
The thing that to me I look for is what happened to the pace of the business when he joined, and I could feel it. I watched things kind of get completed a little bit quicker at a higher level.
One of the things you did or you recommended was write the first 100, 200 articles and then hire people to write the rest of those.
By the time article 3, 350, 400 came around and I brought a writer on, I became sort of her editor, right?
You were saying about how you're so embarrassed about your store.
It was very much like not what a D2C brand looks like. But we have this weird DNA of coming from like YouTube, Instagram, podcast, blogging first. So our store has taken on like kind of like a Chimera-esque look to it that I think we're kind of just getting through right now.
And I just selfishly, oftentimes I'll do an episode and bring someone on because I want to learn about X or Y, or they trying to think very clearly with my audience, dear listener, in mind about what I want them to get out of it. I have to admit today, I'm not doing that at all. I'm doing an episode purely because today's guest, Kevin Espiritu, is someone I've been, followed for a while. He's come up through the ranks, built something incredible. And I just think he's a really interesting marketer, an interesting human. And I wanted to geek out with him and just get to know him a little bit. I think you'll learn a lot as well, too. We'll talk about a bunch of things, all things e-commerce, marketing related, and a bunch of other things that might surprise you. But he is, if you're not familiar with him, he's the founder and CEO of Epic Gardening, which is the world's most followed gardening brand. Almost 3 million subscribers on YouTube. He's put out a number of great books, one of which is on my nightstand right now. Has a meaningful e-commerce business, a podcast, and a lot of other reaches into the world. As we get into fascinating story of how he's built a world-class media and commerce business on top of his interests. So Kevin, thanks for being able to do this. I can't wait to dive in on a bunch of super nerdy topics here.
Yeah, man. I'm excited to be here. I don't know if you know, but back in the day, before Epic Gardening really was much of a media brand, let alone a commerce brand, I was very familiar with a lot of your work and trying to figure out how to do e-commerce in general, probably for a different project. I honestly have lost what that project was to the sands of time, but it's really cool to be on the show.
Man, well, thanks. Glad everything came full circle, and you've built. I kind of want to start with your Epic homestead. For people who don't, how do you describe it? Because I have so many things I love about what you have built in San Diego. You're going to do a better job of describing it than I can. But can you give people a sense, like if they came to visit you in San Diego, what would they see?
Yeah, so if you came to visit, you kind of wonder where you were going. I won't exactly disclose where I live, but it certainly, when you get to the homestead, you go, really? Here? It doesn't seem like it would be here, but it's in a suburban neighborhood, about a third of an acre lot. It's a really old house, like a 100-year-old home on like this very corner side of a lot. And it's 1,000 square feet. So the home's tiny. And when I first moved in, there was just nothing on the land whatsoever, like maybe a couple trees, some wood chips. That's about it. And so that was about 3.5 years ago. If you come there today, you'll find 15, 20 raised beds in the front yard, 25 fruit trees, all producing. You've got, there's a pond in the backyard, a greenhouse, a chicken coop. There's 24 solar panels on the roof, collecting rainwater off of that roof to like a 5,000 gallon cistern, which I can use to water the garden or refill the pond or, irrigate crops, etc. So it's basically an exploration of like, how far can you take a standard suburban home and make it a producing asset instead of just one that's like, pulling energy from the grid, pulling water from the city tap, and, buying in groceries and all that. And so it's gone pretty well. I mean, I'm pretty much tapped out as far as space here now, but if I really had to, I could more or less live off of the land in this house.
The other thing too is such a phenomenal backdrop for doing content. Like obviously you're doing gardening content, but just the backdrop and the setting itself for filming the videos that you do. You obviously aren't shooting the suburban landscape, but it looks like you're on a multi-acre, 10-acre farm out in, the backwoods of Maine somewhere. It's really cool.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that really was, I bought it in 2020, really lucky timing. I bought it in about May of 2020.
Oh yeah.
Like right before the run up and when everyone was still very scared, right, of, I guess, anything as far as the way of purchasing goes. But yeah, when I saw it, it was affordable for me at the time. San Diego is not that cheap of a place to purchase. But I was, prior to that, growing in like maybe a 30 square foot 35 square foot front yard. And so there's almost nothing. This was like downtown San Diego. And so when I saw it, I was like, I'm doing product already, which I know we're going to talk about, but just on the media side of the business, I can tell a story about the transformation of this place. So I called it the Epic Homestead. I actually started a second YouTube channel at that time called Epic Homesteading because I knew I was going to want to talk about non-gardening topics like preserving or cooking or whatever. And my basic logic was I was like, I think just on the increased amount of content I can create here for people, that should pretty much pay for the house. And that's obviously been the case.
Yeah, that's super cool. We've done something in Tucson that is like a tiny fraction of what you have done and with much less intentionality, but it's about a quarter acre, fruit trees. We've got some like rainwater harvesting on the basin side of things. And it just, there's something that's so satisfying about taking a piece of land and kind of shaping it to how you want it to be, making it more comfortable, being able to like, to pick for a Montana boy, to be able to pick an orange off of a tree, or to like be able to make orange and lemon, preserve or jams with, like, that stuff is so cool. And it takes a little time and it takes a while, but it's improving a property, especially one that can kind of, you can reap the rewards of and maybe, I mean, you and I come from a digital background, right? So maybe this is just like the angst that builds when you're on a keyboard all day,
Could
but
be.
there's something really cool about it.
Could be. Yeah. I mean, I know I grew up playing all sorts of different video games. I was on a computer from a very young age and I was playing Sim City, Sim Farm. I played Harvest Moon. I then played Stardew Valley when that came out. So something in me has always been drawn to these like simulator style video games. And if they have something to do with the natural world, all the better. And so in a way, I guess I'm kind of living out that exploration just in the real world. But you're totally right. Like, planting the fruit trees 3 years ago, harvesting them today, it's just a beautiful feeling that you did that and now it's paying off for you and you can, share it with your friends and family and stuff. So it's really very satisfying, especially for digital people like us.
Yeah. Can you give people a sense of the scope of your e-commerce business in terms of, I don't know, if orders shipped or rough revenue tier, whatever you're comfortable with? And it'll make
Yeah,
sense for a minute here with my next question, but give people a sense of the scope of the business on the e-com side you've built.
sure. So we should hit somewhere in the mid-8 figures this year of revenue if we do our jobs right. Hopefully scaling towards 9 in the next 3-4 years or so. And most of that's comprised of two core business lines. One would be the Epic Gardening Store, which is what I started in about 2019, which is about 3 years after I started doing Epic full time. And so that's products that we invent and manufacture ourselves, products that we exclusively distribute, and then also products where we have like a collaborative kind of relationship. Maybe we do a custom color on a vertical planter that we really love or something like that. And then in 2022, the fall of 2022, we purchased a brand called Botanical Interest, which is a seed company. So if you go to a nursery and you see all those packets of seeds, we're in about 75% of all nurseries in the country with these like very hand-drawn illustrated seed packets that if you know a nursery, you've definitely seen it before. And so that's the other portion of our e-com business, but it's not even just e-com. I mean, it's really just com, right? Because we're in wholesale for a majority of that business, but we've also kind of exploded the online business just by the nature of how our content kind of plugs into a commerce business like the seed one. And so that's the two halves of, I would say, the whole, the e-com side of the business.
But you said Botanical. What was the second name of it?
Botanical Interests. Yeah, it's actually, if you're
Botanical
watching the
Interest.
video, it's the hat right there.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
I think I've seen those. I had no idea that you own that brand. I will, when we go and get seeds for planting, man, that's who I'm picking up now.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's a great brand. It's actually the brand I first started growing when I was just a noob going into the garden like 12 years ago with my brother. I picked the packet up because it's one of the few that has these very intricate botanical illustrations on it. It's kind of a light colored packet. And so I picked up some cucumbers and lo and behold, we now own the brand like 12 years later. It's crazy.
That's awesome. I asked you about the size and scope of the business because when we were talking before we hit record, you were saying about how you're so embarrassed about your store because, correct me if I'm wrong, but you kind of built this media company and got a lot of traffic and then use that to send that to your store. And so, which I think is I think it's the right way to build a business, right? Like it's a way better problem to have than people who have beautiful landing pages and no traffic, or traffic they're paying $100 per click for it and
Right.
just can't pencil out. But what are when you say that, like you're so embarrassed about your store, what are some of the facets that because obviously it's working really well. What are the things that you're embarrassed about? And I'm saying this not to point to the few things that you want to make better, but
Hmm.
more so to point to the fact that uh, a lot of these things a lot of people obsess and worry about, I think, are really not really material, and we often focus on the wrong things.
You could be right there. I mean, I'll tell a quick story. So when I first started offering the products, the flagship product that I had back in the day in 2019 was a raised bed. So it's a metal raised bed garden. It's called a Birdie's raised bed. You've probably seen it if you're into gardening at all. It's kind of this corrugated metal planter. Now there's millions of copycats out there, which maybe we'll talk about as well. But back in the day, I was just a media company, right? I had Instagram, YouTube, podcast, blog, whatever. And I noticed that people wanted those beds. I had some samples in my yard. It was always the question that was asked. So when I did get some distribution going for that product, I just slapped up a very simple, shop.epicgardening.com subdomain on Shopify. And I actually looked today at the Wayback Machine to see what the homepage looked like. I was trying to impress upon my team, like it looked really janky back in the day. But in a way, it was the charm of it, right? So it was a single page site because I only had 3 SKUs at the time. And why not put them on the homepage? And so there's like 3 little product boxes, and then there's just a letter from me saying, "Hey, I run. I'm the founder of Epic Gardening. We teach people all around the world how to grow, which means we've seen thousands of products, and so we know what works. And we're excited to introduce like this flagship product, which is these Birdie's raised beds. And it's like keep on growing, Kevin, almost like a letter, right? And that's all that it was. And for quite some time, at least a year or more, it was a very simple setup like that. Now, some pages, some new catalog items got added, but it was very much like not what a D2C brand looks like. And so now we're going through this evolution of we we have quite a few more products on our store, some that we invent. We have like 15 SKUs worth of seed trays that we manufacture ourselves. And so we need to kind of grow up, so to speak. And the growing pains of being like a content first commerce company is very different than the ones that you might mention, Andrew. Like, if you started out selling something and you mastered paid traffic and this and that, like your store probably looks pretty good, right? But we have this weird DNA of coming from like YouTube, Instagram, podcast, blogging first. So our store has taken on like kind of like a Chimera-esque look to it that I think we're kind of just getting through right now.
Yeah, but that's such a better way. I mean, you're creating products first and foremost that you love. My opinion about if you should follow like a niche that you're passionate about has really changed over the last 15 years. 15 years ago, when I got started, probably when you got started, around that time or a little later, uh, I was very much like, it doesn't matter. You don't need to be passionate about this because you can figure out. There's so much opportunity in figuring out distribution and suppliers and traffic and generation, things like that. And today, that's the easy part, right? And I think
Mm-hmm.
if you actually have the experience like you do, the things that I think are rare, I'm trying to think a lot more about this as I think about building a business for the next 10 years. I think conviction is rare. I think community is rare. I think storytelling is increasingly rare, like good storytelling. And I think truly differentiated products are really rare. And I think like as you think about how you can use those to get traffic, and attention, like you're in a perfect spot for that. Cause I mean, from the storytelling front, from the products that you actually use, they're great.
Yeah, it's really interesting you bring it up that way. I've always been of the mind of like you're either a business nerd or you are a category nerd that learns business because you love
Yeah.
the category, right? And so I'm I'm a weird hybrid. I would say I'm maybe like 65-35 category to business because I wouldn't have the drive to do this in another category. Like if it
Yeah.
was, let's say, water bottles or something like that. The Simple Modern guys are amazing to learn from and to look at, but I just couldn't care about it enough to do it. And that's just in my DNA. Like, I don't know how to make myself care about that. And so to me, back in the day, I was always like, I'm doing well as a solo operator here. And especially when I bolted on the commerce to the business, there was no crazy desire to like scale to the moon just because, like just for businesses purposes. And so I think you're right. Like I sort of lucked into the fact that what's valued these days in 2024, like you mentioned, is like truly differentiated product. Because if it's very legible on how to like manage the supply chain, get samples, navigate terms, MOQs, et cetera, well, then anyone can do it, right? And so if anyone can do it, then your barriers to entry go to zero. And so you actually need to functionally make the product better, and you won't be able to do that unless you have the category knowledge. And so I just happened to kind of be in a position because of that path that I chose, where that's what's strong right now and we happen to have it. But I wouldn't say I like engineered that.
Yeah. Talk a little bit, if you would. So you are, I believe you started media business doing it on your own and potentially even got into the e-commerce side without outside funding. But
Mhm.
you took funding and took outside investors to help accelerate that growth. And based on what you said earlier, you know, being a 65% kind of niche guy, 35% business, I would expect someone in that category to be like, I don't need to grow. I'm doing great, doing super well. I've got the epic homestead. I got a good life. I got a good income. Keeps me interested.
Mhm.
I can chill at the end of the day. Why take money? What went into the decision to take money to grow? Because I think that's something that most people listening have not done. They're much more the bootstrap mentality.
I never thought I would. Right. And I remember we raised money from the Churning Group, who's done some pretty famous deals like Barstool Sports or Meat Eater or Hodinkee Watches, et cetera. And so I remember deleting many emails from all sorts of different investors, venture, private equity, et cetera. And I was like, why? Why would I ever sell a piece? Because it sort of is me. At least at the time, I felt this brand is me. You're buying because I'm saying this is good. And you trust me because you've learned from me and you've used the advice and it's worked, right? And so for a while, I just sort of pushed it off. And I almost went through like an identity crisis, I would say, even during the time of raising, because to me, I felt like I was selling, so to speak, a piece of my own self, which I think that
Yeah.
gets to like a different question about how founders identify with their businesses and how that may or may not be a healthy thing in the long run. But regardless, like the logic on raising eventually came down to number one, it was tail end of 2021. Like I did have to ask myself the question of, will this exist in the future? Will the opportunity to secure funding and like boost the growth of the company actually even exist next year, given how wild this market is, you know? So that was certainly a question. And then the other question I asked myself is, do I know what I'm doing at the degree I need to know what I'm doing, or could I use some help here? And at that point, Andrew, we were at me, four contractors. So it was me, an editor for our videos, an assistant who would help in the garden, but also help at our warehouse, which I owned at the time, uh, and then an executive assistant on like customer service and a writer for our blog. So me and four people, all contractors, and we were doing. I think we probably touched about 7.3 million in revenue that year. Which I looked around at other YouTubers that I knew, other podcasters, et cetera, and I was like, I don't see anyone hitting these numbers at this lean of a team and this sort of
Yeah.
skeleton crew. And so I was like, I think I'm missing something, and I think a wave of like complexity might be coming for the business that I don't quite understand yet. And these people understand it, and they know what's coming, right? And that ended up actually being very true, because obviously in 2022 the markets weren't doing as well, and we had like sales tax nexus in like 42 different states, and I was navigating that, right? And so all that sort of operational complexity of shipping big boxes around the country caught up to me. And then there's also just the macro question of, I was already ahead in the space, both on a content side and on a upstart commerce brand. And so I was like, why would I not lock down the advantage if you believe that more capital would give you a strategic advantage? And I did. So that's a kind of like a long-winded way of doing it, but it was very multifaceted. It was hard to work through.
So a lot of times, I mean, a big chunk of money can be very helpful. It can also be a way to throw money at problems and you solve them less effectively, or with.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And so, like, what is it? What is it that money has allowed you to do to grow over the last 3 years rapidly? Because you were at you said 7.3, so you went from 7 to mid 8 figures. So I mean that's a roughly 7 to 10xing ish over the last 3 years with the money.
Yeah.
Was it just hiring writers? Was it hiring people to help you with supply chain and warehouse? What were the big things that investment allowed you to do better?
So the biggest, I would say, it allowed me to spend on more than one category of the business. So for me, back in the day, I was spending, I think by the time we did that deal, I maybe had like a million two in cash in the bank account. And it was like spend half a million on product, and then keep some level of buffer in case things happen. And that's pretty much what you spend your money on. And so it allowed me to continue cycling inventory, but also making like little small micro acquisitions, or also hiring up with people that functionally added leverage to the business. Like we hired a director of commerce, we hired a customer service team, and some of the things that allowed us to do were really cool. Like we purchased the seed trays that I mentioned earlier from my friend Diego, who now works as our product designer, and he's now built out an entire suite of products in that line that go to D2C, but also go to wholesale. Now we're seeing some early interest there. And I couldn't have spent the money to acquire those assets and bring him into the company while also buying inventory, right? Or while also, I don't know, hiring up three other people in another part of the business. So it's mostly just the ability to make a few different moves at the same time so I could run them in parallel instead of in sequence, right? The problem, though, like you mentioned, is you do that too much and you're like, well, what's 40 grand here? What's 30 grand there? Oops, we made a mistake. Well, it was only 10 grand. It's not that big a deal. And obviously, just months ago, I would have not had that same mindset. I'd be like auditing every penny, right? And so there's a little bit of like looseness that can come with that you have to really keep an eye on.
Yeah. How do you think about it from a content perspective? I mean, I was prepping for this. I saw that one of the things you did or you recommended was write the first, 100, 200 articles. I think you wrote probably your first 400 articles and
Mhm.
then hire people to write the rest of those. And it's funny. In my experience, like I've had a harder time writing maybe it's because I'm a control freak. I'm not sure, but maybe it's because the passion's not there. Maybe the interests aren't aligned as much. I'm not sure, but I've had a much harder time scaling content, written content from a team. And I've also talked with other people. We did an episode with Tracy Wallace recently who kind of had the same experience. I know very few people who've been able to scale well with a team of writers. I know probably 10 to 1 where it's been somebody who is an expert, has passion in a field, and that nuance, that just that 10% difference in nuance and care really makes a difference. So, but you obviously have made it work. So like how have you been able to do that when so many other people have failed?
Man, I think a lot of it just has to do with the background that I had because I came up through kind of the world of SEO and website design and building and blogging. And so I was
Yeah.
very deeply plugged into organic SEO from the start. And so by the time, Article 3, 350, 400 came around and I brought a writer on, I became sort of her editor, right? So she's now writing, and I'm providing the skeleton of all these different sort of post templates. I'm making sure that we're optimizing them correctly. And then, of course, as you scale out the writing team, you elevate her to sort of a junior editor. And then now what we've done is, speaking of acquisitions, we actually purchased another blog from a friend of mine who was building a gardening blog and he was scaling it really quickly. And so I said, why don't you just join at the same time as us acquiring your blog? Because we need someone who's run a blog at scale the way you have because I can't do that anymore. I'm doing other things in the business. And so we brought on this guy Jason who's been incredible, and he actually folded his blog into our blog. So it's kind of doubled traffic, actually more than doubled traffic. But regardless, like to answer your question, you have to have this you have to run it like a true media business, right? Like you need to have the structure, writer, editor, maybe a post formatter of some kind, or someone who's proofing or checking. And it's more than just like, the founder watching over a few writers, because otherwise you just get bogged down.
Yeah. Yeah. You've done it super well. Talk, if you would, a little bit about health and burnout. Like, I mean, you and I kind of were exchanging some DMs, I don't know, a couple months ago, and just talking about how we'd gone through similar phases of been doing something for a while, been pushing hard, feeling like you needed a reset and change. Um, for you, and then also on the back end too, like realizing like from a health perspective, you kind of neglected your health for like 2 or 3 years, and then you wake up one day and you're like not in the condition or the health that you want to be in. Talk a little bit about that if you would. Like how long were you pushing for and what did that look like? And how did that kind of finally manifest itself to make you think, hey, I got to make some changes here?
Yeah, I think longer than I would even care to admit, I would say, because building Epic from 2016 onwards, I had a string of kind of moderately successful to treading water type projects, and then worked at a company, learned a lot, left. And I was just like hungry to make it work, and I was going to do anything. So I would write for 12 to 14 hours a day in that first kind of chunk, and then it'd be 12 to 14 hours on something else after that was done. And I would just do that every single day. And so, everything was secondary to that for quite some time. And then after the raise and scaling up a team, there's just a lot more pressure. There's a lot more responsibility. So then there's the mental toll. Because in the past, you're a solopreneur with some scaled out, team members. But in the end, like if you wanted to stop, you could, right? And
Right.
now there's a lot of people that depend on Epic to keep going so that their lives keep going. And there's also, investors in, and I have my own goals for the business, and that takes a mental toll. And I think it was about, man, probably about this time last year, a little bit later in the year last year, maybe May or June, where it all kind of caught up, and I was like, I need to do some sort of reset. Like I need to make like a legit hardcore change in life. And so I adjusted the way that I interact with all the different platforms. I was just way too connected to all those platforms and to the audience, and in a way that's like just not scalable at the scale we're at today. I'd respond to everything all the time. And then my girlfriend and I did that 75 hard fitness challenge. You ever done that?
I've heard it, familiar with it. Is this one where you have to drink like a gallon of water a day and
Yeah.
do all these exercises? You miss
It's a
one
little
day, you go
wild.
back to zero.
Yeah, it's a little wild. So my friend Jason, who he's the guy who runs our blog now that we purchased, he had done it. He was like 30 days in, and I was like, you know what? I'll join in. My girlfriend and I joined. I didn't do the gallon of water. I think I drank like maybe 100 ounces a day because I was like, I think a gallon's just too much, to be honest with you. Feels like unhealthy. But anyways, ended up dropping 20-25 pounds, which was good, like good reset, because I was touching my heaviest weight of my life probably January of last year. And my dad passed away in part because of his health choices when I was young, and so I was like, "Holy shit, I'm just going to be him." Um, so it was just a wake up call moment, and I'm still on the journey. But it's annoying. You have to have those like crises to fix it instead of just be moderate most of the time. But it seems like that's the story I hear from everyone.
Yeah. Was a big part of it too, not being able to unplug and just being hyper connected into everything as well.
Yeah, absolutely. 'Cause if you think about it, like Epic gardening, the content, at least the video stuff and the podcast and all that, it's at my house. Like behind this little screen here is the garden, and that's where we film.
Yeah.
And there's someone there right now as we speak working on the garden because I'm not on it right now. I'm talking to you. So, tomorrow there'll be a team here filming, and so it's a small home. Like there's really no separation. And
Yeah.
so not only is there no physical separation, but as a founder, there's rarely mental separation. I'm sure you know that. And so both firing 24/7 for years, it's like the water you're swimming in gets murky and you didn't realize it, right? Until you kind of somehow hop out of the water and you go, whoa, I actually can't see in that water. It's quite dark.
Oh man, having physical separation. I built a home office a couple of years ago, and it takes me 15 seconds to walk to the main house where my family is, my kids, my wife. But even just that separation, one from an environment for just quiet, productive work, and two for the physical separation,
Yeah.
is by far one of the best things I think I've ever invested in my life. Like top
Yeah.
three, if not top two or one.
I even thought
Um,
about like renting the house next door so that I could live there and work here. But to me, part of the
yeah.
charm of our story is that this is where I live. This is what I do, right? I'm not like renting a set that I'm turning into a gardening backdrop, but I do need to figure out some sort of healthier breakdown of this. Cause I mean, we'll even have people show up that aren't invited, right? And they've somehow tracked us down, and they'll come into the backyard and this and that. And so it's just too much.
Yeah, you got security people hopping out of the corn rows to
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
bounce people out. Yeah, I
Yeah,
can. Well,
yeah.
I mean,
We put cameras in just because that we needed evidence that people were doing it, and if they stole something or tried to do something weird.
if you can get within a quarter mile of your house, it's probably it doesn't take that long to figure out where you are, given how
Yeah.
unique it is. I'm sure.
Yeah.
There's a great. I know you're kind of we were talking about a little health stuff before. There's a phenomenal podcast I listened to recently. It was so good. I need to go back and like listen to it again and take a bunch of notes. It's by Andrew Huberman from Huberman Lab and Cal Newport from Deep
Oh
Work.
yeah.
And I've have you listened to this one?
I haven't, but I know Cal's work pretty well.
Yeah, and I've read his book. I'm pretty familiar with Cal as well. But this podcast they did, the two of them, was just at a different level in terms of the depth he talked about. And we were talking about earlier just about kind of getting back to work and doing less like podcasts like this one and actually building stuff. But it was for anyone listening and for you too, Kevin, like just one of the best in terms of top three podcasts I've listened to in the last year in terms of stuff that you can get out of it to just have a better, more productive life that's not insane. So
Yeah. Yeah. I'll check it out. It's easy to, my background, like I used to play poker for a living and all these different projects, obviously multi-platforming all this content that we did. My brain works really well with I wouldn't necessarily call it non-deep work, but it can be stretched quite a bit. And so a reset down to focus is sometimes what I need to kind of get things back going.
Yeah. How are you thinking? One of the things I think most people listening to this are struggling with right now. You did it, what in my opinion, the right way. You build an audience first, and then you build a product, and like that's just the way to do it.
Hmm.
If you can, if you have the time. I mean, you put in the reps, writing 12 hours a day. Like that's like most people, myself included, could maybe write 2 or 3 hours a day tops, and then you have to go do something else.
Hmm.
But most people right now in ecom 2024, like acquisition's the hard part, like getting attention, that's where most people are struggling. How are you thinking about that today? Like you obviously have a massive platform, but are you thinking about it in the same way? When you think about, YouTube and SEO and how you are engaging with people, or has that shifted a little bit? Because I feel like fundamentally things have shifted in terms of the skills needed, like I alluded to earlier. But how are you thinking about getting attention today, and has it shifted over the last 3 or 4 years?
It's definitely shifted. I mean, if we're talking last 3 or 4 years, you have the rise of TikTok, right? 2019 onwards. And that changed, that was basically a domino effect that changed all video content in the world. So we got on TikTok in like 2019. I remember vividly when I realized the power of short form video was October of 2019. And I was growing this plant called a dragon fruit. And it's a flower that blooms. It's a cactus, tropical cactus. And the flower blooms about 4 p.m. till about 11 p.m. in one day. And so it all happens in like 8 hours. And if you don't pollinate it in that window, then that plant won't set a fruit and you won't get a dragon fruit and you have to wait till next year, right? At least for that flower. And so I remember I was on TikTok almost using it like an Instagram story back then because no one really knew the formats. And I put a TikTok up. I said, hey, I can't believe this is happening. It's 4 p.m. Check back in for part two. This thing is going to open tonight. So I had a real reason to create like a multi-port piece part of content, right?
Yeah.
Um, and I remember did 4 or 5 stories that night. Flowers open at the end. I'm smiling. I'm freaking out. I'm like pollinating it, this and that. And over the next day or two, our audience went from, I don't know, we were probably 30, 40,000 on TikTok then to 380,000 in a day. And so I was
Holy
like,
cow.
okay, all right, I understand. Like growth is back on the table because for a while in content, specifically organic, which is what I'm used to, it felt like the platforms were a little bit shut as far as their ability to generate reach and new audience. Instagram was a bit stagnant, and then TikTok came in and exploded the game. And so, our audience starts to grow there. Then, of course, IG, Facebook, YouTube all copy the short form format and kind of ungate the reach on those platforms as well. And so we start growing faster on every single one of those. And so what I'm seeing now is that is now kind of a gamed out strategy, right? Everyone knows short form content. It's been systemized to hell. Everyone understands how to use it for paid or for UGC or for organic and all these different formats. And so now we're seeing almost a return to unstructured, sort of rambling storytelling, long form type video content, which that works well for us. We've been doing that kind of stuff for quite some time. But we're also seeing, to me, I think, the tanks of our business from an organic perspective is still our blog and our YouTube channels. Those are my saying is always like the only sources of traffic in the organic world worth anything are places where people type in search boxes still, right? And that's Google, YouTube, and probably Pinterest, and to some degree TikTok. But on these algorithmic first platforms where you open the phone and it's delivering you something you didn't ask for right out of the gate, you're way less likely to be searching, right? Because it's customizing for
Totally.
you. And so to me, I will always invest in the platforms that have long-term evergreen traffic on the organic side, which is still just Google, YouTube, and Pinterest, maybe to some degree TikTok. But then you get into the question of, on TikTok, the audience quality does not have the ability to spend in our category. Maybe in beauty and snacks, et cetera, it's a different story. But for us, a $300 gardening bed and $60 pack of seed trays, it's just not, they're not at that point in their life, right? And so I use that as like a top of funnel organic channel to our other organic channels. So maybe you see us on TikTok, and I would love for you to land on YouTube and kind of dive in. And maybe you even need to hang there and learn for a couple years, mess around with houseplants, and then you get an apartment and you want to garden on your balcony. Then you come back to us and shop. And so, long-winded way of saying the organic side still super important, but at the scale we're trying to get to, we can't rely on it as much as we used to. I think it taps out at a certain amount of, attributed revenue per year. And after that, like we actually need to start going to bat in all these different acquisition channels. Like we need to spend more money on paid, we need to spend more money on influencer, on affiliate, like all the things that a traditional D2C brand would do that we sort of mistakenly turned our noses up at because we're like, well, we have this audience, like we don't need that. Well, it's like the answer should have been, we have this audience, so that's our secret sauce. We'll still play at a world-class level in these other platforms. And that's one of the mistakes I think we made over the last couple of years.
Yeah. How much has your enthusiasm or willingness to invest in the written content, especially like, blog posts, SEO, waned over? Obviously, it's gotten harder.
Yeah.
It's gotten hard enough on my side where we made a run at it a year and a half ago to kind of restart, because I built. I was like you, like this e-commerce fuel. I built it all completely off of written blog posts, sitting down, hammering them out, releasing them consistently, putting a ton of stuff out there, and that's what built the brand. Got away from that for a while and tried to take another shot at that recently, and just the level of increased competition. And we have a decent, from a domain perspective, decent domain authority from that perspective, very topical. And even some of the stuff, the difficulty level increase, even over the last 2 or 3 years, was meaning. Anyway, long way of saying I decided it wasn't worth it.
Interesting.
Are you still very bullish on written content, or is like the amount you're investing there? Is your enthusiasm dimmed a little bit?
Well, so from my own perspective, I don't manage the blog at all anymore. So I've written more articles than I care to at this point in time. And so for me to have a team, but I have a team that I really love and trust. So Jason runs it. We have a team of anywhere from 15 to 25 writers, depending on seasonality and what they're working on. And then we have some support staff that help, like assistant editor, et cetera. So I've actually never been more bullish on written, which sounds crazy to say in a world of like Google search generated experience, all these crazy core algorithm updates that are just kneecapping people. But what I attribute that to is we have a great team that understands how to write for today. We've never done anything ever since I started the domain. I registered the domain in like 2013. I've never done anything even in the gray hat world of SEO. Just never really did anything like that. And I think that has a huge impact. We also have a lot of brand signal coming from other platforms. Like Google obviously owns YouTube. So I'd have to be dumb to imagine that they have not yet connected that a 3 million subscriber YouTube channel is associated with our blog, right? And that I'm a character in that world and Jacques on our team's a character in that world. But just on raw numbers, we'll put out in spring anywhere from 120 to 180 articles on our blog per month. And we'll generate, so we run ads on our blog. That's another thing that I think might be weird for, many people listening to this podcast. Obviously you'd say, why not drive to product? And we do. But not all search queries are directly monetizable via the offering that we have on our store. And so what we'll do is we'll run advertising on our blog. And so we have a 7-figure revenue line of business just on the advertising side of Epic, whether it be on the blog or the YouTube channel. So that money cycles back into the content itself and keeps our entire content operation across video, audio, and written at a profitable line of business. So the media side of the business, which from a commerce perspective runs as kind of like free marketing, so to speak, or free word of mouth, runs at a slight profit. Whereas in other people's businesses, they're spending millions a year on organic and hoping that they make it up in like the LTV of the commerce business.
That's fascinating. For the advertising, are you selective if you have a blog article specifically as a perfect queue up for one of your best products? Are you turning off advertising for that post, or are you leaving it on universally?
What we'll do is, so we run our display advertising through Raptive, which used to be called AdThrive. And they're, I believe, like a 5, 6, or 7 on the ComScore. So like the total aggregated traffic that Raptive manages is one of the biggest sources of traffic on earth. And so they programmatically will place things, but we've reserved certain slots on certain templates of posts or whatever that we get placement on. So we're like, hey, look, these reviews on raised beds, let's say, since that's one of our flagship lines, like we're taking one of these slots, we'll take a revenue hit on the display ads because we feel obviously that we have ability to make more revenue, like selling the product itself. And so we'll blend for sure.
Got it. I want to geek out about e-commerce stuff for a second here. Logistics, the warehouse, the whole stack that a lot of people here, I think, the true nerds will stick around for.
Yeah.
Last question before we jump into that part, though. You mentioned at the top that you've been feeling some angst about
Mm.
kind of just general angst about things, about podcasting, like an itch to get back to work a little bit. Unpack that a little bit for me, if you would.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'm I never really was on podcasts, so talking about what we were doing because I'm just making my content and selling my products and,
Yeah.
you know, living. And then I think after raising some funding and the press that might come with that, some folks' eyes perked up, and you go on one podcast, you start going on more. And not to say like I want to get back to work. I feel like I am kind of always working, but to me, I feel like there's a level of talking about what you're doing and sort of promoting like the meta of how you built a thing, right? That I like to do because I talk about gardening most of the time, so it's fun to talk to you about business. But then at some point, I go, okay, like let me put my head down, and you can interview me again in like 3 years when I've done more interesting things that I can talk about. Because at some point, you kind of just want to produce. But yeah, I mean, I think it's just been a very interesting journey the last couple of years, scaling the team up, making acquisitions. I mean, I never thought I'd be running a business in which we employ, closing in on 100 people. Because we have a full warehouse in Colorado that we not only do we pick and pack our seeds that we sell to retail and to wholesale and to direct to consumer, but we also literally receive bulk seed that we contract grow out, and we'll germination test it. We'll test it for GMOs. We'll test it for pesticides. We'll then pack it into the actual packs, put it in cold rooms. Like there's a whole operation there that is much more complex than like I ever thought I'd run when I was a YouTuber only.
Yeah. That's a great kind of transition for that. So the seed business,
Hmm.
I'm trying to even think about what to ask about that. This is the business that you bought, the botanical
Yeah.
business, the
Botanical
seed
interest.
business.
Hmm.
Thank you, botanical interests. So was a lot of that infrastructure in place before? Well, I'm sure it was. So how much did you have to build and refine? I'm guessing the majority of it was in place. So you didn't have to build this from scratch.
Yeah, this is actually our 30th anniversary, but only the second that I've been around for. But the founders have been at this business for quite some time, and so yeah, it's based in Denver, Colorado. There's a warehouse. There's very bespoke machinery on how to count and pack all sorts of different types of seeds because we offer like 650 varieties of vegetables, fruits, and herbs and flowers, and
Wow.
not all seeds look the same, and not all seeds are the same weight or size. And so there's actually a lot of complexity in how to count seed, how expensive seed is per variety. I mean, it's crazy. I mean, if you wanted to buy a pound of stevia seed, you're out many tens of thousands of dollars. But if you want to buy a pound of beans, you're probably out like $4. And so there's a crazy amount of complexity in how to get all these things in packets.
Man, and are you growing these seeds yourself, or are you working with wholesalers that you're able to buy them from?
It's a mix. So we don't have any production fields we directly manage, but if there's varieties, there's varieties of flowers and vegetables that we are the only people that seem to want to stock them and sell them. And so we'll work with what are called contract growers or production growers and say like we need this many pounds of this delivered to this level of quality in this year. And they'll bring that over for us, and either it hits the mark or it doesn't. And then there's some seeds that are just so ubiquitous that you're buying them from a larger scale grower that specializes, let's say, in herbs, and you'll go buy Genovese basil from them. There's no real value in us growing out our own field of Genovese basil because it's such a ubiquitous seed.
And so I'm guessing you buy them in bulk. They'll come in, and do you have a machine where you dump millions of seeds into it, and it will filter them out per packet? Is that a machine that you have to create? Can you go buy those on the market?
Yeah, I mean, if you want, I can run through like a basic process of how a seed comes in and how it leaves.
I
Would
would
that be
love to
interesting?
hear that. I think, yeah, I
Okay.
think the logistics about behind the scenes supply chains are always fascinating.
Okay, cool. So say say we were ordering some specialty basil, right? So it's not Genovese. It might be quite expensive for us to even buy on a per pound price. Sometimes you buy per pound, sometimes you buy per count. So what'll happen is those bags, and they'll be bulk bags, will show up at our warehouse, and then the guy who who receives them, his job is, did we get what we ordered? Obviously, you're checking like the WRO. But then what he'll do is he'll take a representative sample of each bag. There's like this metal tool that has 5 different layers to it. So you can stab it into a bag and it will grab seed from every part of it. because sometimes you have like clusters of rot or whatever, right? And so he'll do that, and he'll take seeds from each of those, and he'll send it out for a GMO test because we were 100% non-GMO. He'll send it out for a pesticide and a germination test because per FDA or USDA, I forgot which, but also for our own standards, you have to offer seed that hits a certain level of germination percentage, and that's based on the variety that you sell. So if it's let's say basil, the law says 92%, we're obviously shooting for 92, but we're shooting for 98, 99. And there's a lot of ways that you can control for that. So one would be you can filter out bad seed. One would be maybe there's like particulate matter in there that would decrease the germination percentage. And so then he'll look and he'll say, is this stuff clean, right? Different growers clean to the level that the machinery that they have is. And so some people will have like super clean seed and we're good to go and we'll move on to the next step. And some people don't. So we'll put it on uh, two different types of machines. One basically is like a winnowing style machine where seed goes through and air blows the lighter stuff off and the heavier stuff falls down, which is the viable seed. Then you recollect that. And then another one is like a shaker table, which kind of shakes out and you can put on different plates and it depends on, the size of the seed. So the stuff that doesn't fall through wouldn't be the seed, right? So it would be a little piece of bark or a little stone or something like that. So let's say that's done. Then it depends on if it's an expensive seed or not. If it's not an expensive seed, we won't use a counting machine. If it is, let's say a sun gold tomato is a pretty expensive tomato variety, we'll put it through a machine that slowly drops the seed and lasers track how many there are. And so we'll say, hey, we ordered 10,000 sun golds. You actually only gave us 9,800. And this is very expensive seed. So either credit us against that invoice or we're just going to pay you less or whatever, right? So it's our way of auditing. After that, seeds will go into storage until they need to get packed. And so when they get packed, what that means is you're taking it from its bulk pack and you're putting it in these machines. Like you mentioned, Andrew, these are very bespoke machines with seed packing machines. So it'll take the little packet, which is like kind of like an index card size. Like if you've gone to a nursery or Home Depot or whatever, you've seen these seed packs, and it will open it up. It will count the right amount of seed. That might be weight, or some seeds, it might literally be a count. So lasers will count 7 and put 7 seeds in, and that's the only seeds that can go in. It will seal it off, and then it will throw it down the line. And then you're just running production lines based on demand for, let's say, direct to consumer or for wholesale or whatever else. It's fascinating when you see it running, but it's a crazy complex production line for sure.
And when you're selling, this seems like a business that would make total sense for wholesale, just given the fact that you're probably selling, I don't know, I'm guessing low price, like $3, $4, maybe $10 on the high side,
Yeah.
low AOV. Is most of your business wholesale here, or do you have enough people adding products as add-ons to your other gardening sites that it works well online too?
Yeah. Well, the previous founders, like wholesale, they grew up in nurseries in their careers. And so they service nurseries primarily. We also have Whole Foods, Sprouts, Petco just expanded with us. So we have some larger stores, but yeah, it's mostly wholesale to nurseries specifically, like independent family owned nurseries.
Yeah.
And then one of the reasons we thought it was an exciting company to bring into the fold is that they had historically not done a ton with the online presence. And so it was a decent business. It was a 7-figure line, but we were like, well, we see a lot that could be different. I mean, they were on a commerce platform that you'd have to call and say, like, can we get this change made to our homepage type of thing? Like, I don't even know when that was a viable move, like the 90s. I don't really know. But anyways, we moved that over to Shopify, and yeah, I would say it's probably going to remain a wholesale business primarily, but we see a ton of growth in not only bringing their assortment across to the Epic store as well as the store that they have online, but the reverse, where we're bringing product to market on Epic that we know sells, right? Like the seed trays I mentioned. Why would we not offer that to the wholesale market, right? Because we have a proven product that will bring feet indoors that's better than what's on the market that they're selling at the nursery. So kind of like category expansion through wholesale is a big opportunity for us too.
And you've got the Denver seed factory, of course. And then do you have a different warehouse for the product lines that you're doing under Epic, the seed trays, the things like that you have either buying wholesale or a lot of stuff you develop yourself? Do you have a different warehouse for that in California?
We did actually. So the brief timeline there is the first time I ever started selling products, I had a 3PL right near the port of Los Angeles, like Thousand Oaks or something like that. And they were managing all of it. Then I was looking at the 3PL fees and I was like, man, I'm paying like 25 grand a month just for pick and pack. Like, what if I just bought a warehouse? Wouldn't I then be paying kind of a mortgage that would go into equity? And I'd, this sort of like holdco model. You have a real estate company. And so I bought a warehouse in San Diego, got my forklift card, like learned how to do all of that. And after we raised some capital, it made less sense because when you have the Denver facility, you're just at a more favorable average blended shipping zone out of there. And the complexity of running two different warehouses on two different sort of software stacks. At that time, we also were using a company called ShipBob because our flagship product are these raised beds, right? And they're very heavy. And so we had, in my opinion, looking back, kind of faulty logic of, well, if we have 4 regional warehouses with ShipBob, then we'll save a lot of money on shipping. But what I didn't program in was the complexity of that. You have 4 different, let's say you have 10 SKUs. Now we have 40 different SKUs to manage effectively. And then you also have the transit costs to get to all those places is multiplied by 4. And so it actually ended up not being the right move. So we just consolidated everything back into Denver. The only thing that we do have is we have an East and West Coast 3PL that will ship primarily our larger goods that are kind of already in box. Just to save some space at the warehouse, because the warehouse was like not designed to have another company's assortment filling it. So we're kind of working through that right now.
So you do have a 3PL on the East Coast, West Coast, and do you have a warehouse that you're actually running of your own for the Epic side of things? Or
Epic
is it all
stuff comes
3PL?
out of a combo of those two 3PLs as well as our Denver facility now.
Okay, got
Yeah.
it. Awesome. And what's your tech stack look like? Like in terms of obviously on Shopify, but what are you using for customer service? Do you have an ERP that's set up? What are you using for marketing, email? Like
Yeah.
maybe a just quick little rundown of all the stuff in your tech stack and how you like it.
Yeah. I mean, we were on Klaviyo for email, which who knows, definitely open to a swap there. We were on Attentive for SMS, but we switched to PostScript recently. We like that. I kind of subscribe to the Sean Frank model of like all the sort of service providing companies that raised at huge valuations kind of need to justify that, and their pricing might be inflated relative to the new one. So I'm kind of looking at SendLane for a consolidation of both of those, but we're not quite there yet. On the commerce side, obviously Shopify Plus on both domains for Epic and for Botanical Interests. We are in the middle right now of moving over to NetSuite for our overall ERP system. And then there's like a suite of little plugins and this and that are going into that. Uh, the reason why is because we have a relatively complex production line, like I described with the seed business, that we did not find something off the rack that we felt would be better than NetSuite, even though I kind of dreaded having to go to NetSuite. But that's what we decided to do there. And then for let's see what else. I mean, we just started using Amped. Have you heard of Amped?
No. Mm-mm.
It's like a pop up. It's like a email capture pop up thing, but something weird's going on with it. Like it's actually way more effective than our other pop up tool we were using, but it doesn't look that different. So I'm like, I don't understand how our conversion rate on our let's say our email or SMS capture is this much better, but it is. So I'm taking it. And then we use all sorts of different plugins on Shopify to get stuff done. We have like a splitting orders app, and I can run through some if you want.
No, that's great. Just the high level broad strokes there. And then on product development,
hmm
you've got a mix of stuff you're importing, stuff you specialty, sometimes grow, sometimes you specialty custom build. Do you have a whole team in house that's just focused to product development and sourcing?
Yeah, we do. So we have a category manager who's responsible for. Well, first let me back up. So you've got like 3 main channels that product can come out on. One would be a straight up resell relationship where you might drop ship it, you might inventory it, but you're not changing the product in any fundamental way. And the
Yeah.
reason we would do that is because kind of our unique DNA as a content company, there are certain products that we love that we're not going to enter that market. And so we're going to pick the best player and we're ideally going to just partner with them. So a great example, we have this vertical planter called the Green Stock that I've used for a long time. And what I try to do there is like escalate the relationship. So we're not just drop shipping a random product, right? That anyone can do that. What we've done is we've done like a custom colorway with them that we inventory and we sort of extend a little bit so that there's something special to doing that. So that's like what our category manager and buyers are responsible for is that world of things. And then there's the stuff that we actually invent, like the seed tray line. We have a line of grow bags, which are like a fabric bag that we're innovating on. And then these trellises we're working on. We just launched a new wooden raised bed collection, 4 SKUs. That's all done by an in-house product team, and they kind of own different respective verticals of product. It's interesting because like we're sort of going to be the everything store for gardening, which means we are way less specialized than maybe a lot of people listening. Like we're in fertilizers, but we're also in raised beds, which is there's companies that only do one of those, obviously, and we're doing both. So it's an interesting exercise in like prioritization.
Yeah. How do you, I mean, now that people and myself included have a scope of every, I mean, you've got an entire media company on multiple different channels, um, a seed company, a physical products company, 2 to 3 different warehouses, team of 100 people. How do you manage all of this? And this is a big question, open ended, of
Hmm.
course, but um, most people, myself included, like have a small team, 5-ish people, and probably 10 contractors, and that's a lot to manage
Yeah.
for me. And so,
Yeah.
how do you like having grown at the speed you have in 3 years? What are you doing to be able to what are you focusing on? What are the things you're not doing? What are the things that you absolutely like? These are your lanes. How are you making this all work well from a managerial and a leadership standpoint?
It's the question of the century, really, is how to do that. I ask myself that every morning is, am I doing a good job here? Do I need help? Where? How? Because I mean, you remember I told you, like, it was me and 4 contractors 2021, and then to
Yeah.
scale by the end of 2022 to nearly an 100-person company. How would I have known how to do that? Right? I wouldn't have. I never worked at a company bigger than 10, let alone ran one. Right. And so a lot of learning lessons along the way. I still feel like I'm drinking from the fire hose of like management, leadership, et cetera. But I think one of the moves that we did over the course of last year is we did build out a leadership team. So there are true functional owners for different parts of the business. So a vice president of operations, I hired a head of content to be the layer between me as CEO founder and like myself as the talent in front of the camera or behind the mic. So she runs operations, which has been incredible. And then we have like a head of customer experience, et cetera. The big move was to hire a president for the company, though. So we hired a president. It's like a president COO style role, who's the twin flame. So I'm, leading brand, to some degree product, UX, content, all that sort of thing. And then he's leading, operations, logistics, the heartbeat of the company, right? Some of the more like managerial level things that I could get good at, but it's kind of like why if I have a different strength.
Oh yeah. I mean, and for you, it would be so much more fun to focus on that,
Hmm.
and not have to worry. You get in your zone of genius. You do product. You do things you love, and someone else can take care of that.
I
How
think
did you find that president? Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, like, I think another mistake I may have made or currently still be making is I do feel like I'm less legit in my own mind if I can't do those skills, right? Like, if I can't absorb every skill set required to run the business at the level, like, am I not legit? Am I not a good operator? Am I not this? Like, I want to be really good at everything I do, and so I think I've probably been a little hesitant to let go of certain things that I probably should have, and I maybe haven't leaned in hard enough on others that I should have. And so it's very challenging. I don't know if you've experienced that or had other people on the show have had kind of the same feeling.
Oh yeah, I've had, and again, we're different scales for sure. But when I sold my e-commerce businesses and have not since started another one meaningfully, I mean, I've gotten
Yeah.
into some investing and some other things. For a long time, I was like, man, how can I lead this community of store owners without knowing, like,
Hmm.
without being totally up to date on how ShipStation is working as of this year, right?
Hmm.
But I think what I finally came to terms with is like focus. The longer I'm in the game, the more I realize that focus is a huge superpower, and that if you can there's a great book called "Buy Back Your Time" by Dan Martell. Have you read that?
I haven't, but no, I haven't read it.
It's phenomenal, and it's largely talking about getting an assistant and outsourcing things. But the whole point of his book is like you should gear up to try to spend as much of your time in your zone of genius as you can, because that's where you're going to be the happiest. That's where you're going to make the biggest impact. And I really think that's true. So yeah, I think everyone goes through that. I've gone through that a bunch. But I think it's good to understand deeply all the different facets of your business and how they work at a level, so that you can at least know when people are BSing you, understand the implications, how things interplay. but I think you're probably leaving a lot of potential on the table if you're not doing exactly what you did.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think you're right. There's a level of like quelling your curiosity because I'm like insatiably curious, and that can get me in
Yeah.
trouble sometimes. Where I'm like, all right, cool. Like, tell me everything about how this warehouse integration works, and then it's like 4 hours later, and I'm like, did I really even need to know anything about that at all, or is my team fully able to handle that? So it's challenging sometimes.
Uh, $1 million question. I mean, you talk about how to do that, but also we have a lot of 8-figure store owners, and probably one of the biggest challenges that they have is how do you find someone for that president role? Because you have to find someone who is a cultural fit, who has experience, who can slide in and learn. The hard part too is a lot of times like it's usually such a big role that you're not going to be able to measure their performance on within a month, right? Like it's not like you're
Hmm.
answering customer service tickets. Like it's a very nuanced, holistic role. It takes a while to see if they're doing well. So it's obviously probably the biggest hire you're ever going to make.
Yeah.
How did you find your president, and what were you looking for to try to increase the odds it would work?
This, I think, is the biggest benefit of having funding behind you is that
Yeah.
I have an access to a network I would never be able to build in the speed that I've built it. And so, having the Churning Group or some other comparable investor behind you, you just get plugged in. And it's still a hunt. Like it still took quite some time, probably about 6, 7 months to find someone. And we were tapping all options like network, colleagues, friends, and recruiters. Ended up being a recruiter that found who's our president now, Elliot. And it just took a while, like feeling him out. The thing that to me I look for is the pace of the business. Like what happened to the pace of the business when he joined, and I could
Mm,
feel it. Like I could feel it almost in like a meta sense. Like I watched things kind of get completed a little bit quicker at a higher level. One of the things he did actually is he came in to San Diego like maybe 3, 4 days before his official start date, was hanging out in this little office that we had at the time. And one of our core problems at that time was that I had signed an exclusive distribution agreement with my supplier for my raised beds that worked in 2019, but it did not work in the world we were in 2023. And getting that redone unlocked growth for the business, and he did it in 48 hours. And so I was like, well, there's the salary right there, and that was before your payroll even started ticking along. And so to me, I look for like little weird micro moments like that where I'm like, if that's how you're operating, I can very much trust the way you're going to do the rest of your job.
and in the interview process, what was it that sold you pre starting the job? Was it experience, personality, culture, just like a trial period? What got you to okay, you're in?
We did a pretty intense case study. So we had 3 people in the running at the end of the process, and we had this case study on like our goal is to get to 100 million in revenue in X amount of time. That's the North Star. What do you see as the way that you would do it? And it was the level of detail that went into it. It was like, are there novel insights? Because we thought we had an answer. Obviously, we think we know how we're going to do it. And so we're like, how close are they to us? But also, are they bringing us stuff that we were like, whoa, we didn't actually consider that, and that might be better. And
Yeah.
then the way in which they presented that. And then, of course, there's to me, I think a mistake I've made is not depending on the vibe, right? Not gut checking and just saying like, is the vibe correct? Because your subconscious knows way more than your conscious mind. Like you're picking up something there that you can't really quantify. And in this particular case, I went with vibe, and it ended up being the right call. There's other cases where I have not in the past, and it was not the right call. And so I'm trying to lean into that more. Which is not maybe the best answer for like a president style role, but I don't know. There's something to that when you mix like a great case study or however you're evaluating that person, watching their in person behavior, and then like the general vibe. And then there's the humility, right? He does not come from the gardening industry, and so the humility to say like, hey, I don't know this. What do you know? Tell me what you know. I'll be a sponge, and offering what he does know when he does know it.
Yeah. There's something too about spending time with someone. Like there's the humility, there's the expertise, experience, but also just like if I'm on a half-hour call with this person, is it easy? Is it enjoyable? Do I hang up and I'm not drained? Or do I get off? Do I dread looking forward to these? Do I dread these calls? Or are they actually something I don't mind or enjoy? I think that's a big test too. So
Yeah, and that's a hard one to remember to think about, because sometimes you're just in the mode and you're like, oh man, another call. And then you need to step back and go like, why am I always saying that to myself before I hop on the phone? There's a problem there.
yeah, Kevin, This has been awesome. First and foremost, man, congrats on what you've built. I mean, from the epic homestead that you've put together, which is just looks amazing, a little paradise on earth, to growing a very meaningful business, and also the acceleration that you've put on the gas in the last 3-4 years. It's pretty cool, and also it's cool to know that you own that seed company now. So now when I go,
Yeah.
we'll be skipping the Home Depot seeds and getting the good stuff from you.
Hell
So
yeah. I love that.
yeah,
Love that.
man. But yeah, thank you so much for doing this. And if you're listening, you need anything seed related, epicgardening.com. Like I said earlier, Kevin's got a bunch of great books on all facets. Can you talk a little bit about, just quickly while we're wrapping up, the books that you have out there, and the
Mhm.
podcast, and anywhere else where it would make sense for people to find you?
Yeah, I mean, epicgardening.com or shop.epicgardening.com will take you to most places. And then any platform you like consuming content, if you just search Epic Gardening, we'll be there, and we'll be there in force, is what I say. And then the books are actually the only thing kind of not plugged in super well. You can buy them on our store. But if you just type my name into Amazon, you'll see all three of them. There's three. And I just came out with the Epic Homesteading one this year.
Yeah, and that's the one I picked up. I love that one. You do an amazing job. Like, it's impossible to have too many illustrations in a book.
Mm,
I don't know, maybe this is my kid heart speaking here, but like,
yeah.
it's yours are rich. They're all color. They're media. They're big.
You
You
want to
do
know
a
the secret
really
sauce
nice
of that
job.
one? So
Yeah.
this is to me the greatest strength of these content-based businesses like we've built is nearly all, I'd say 70% of all those photos are just screenshots of 4K video from the Epic Homesteading YouTube channel. Because we shot in 4K, so
Wow.
that's just a bunch of very high quality images. So like the compost section, if you're running through that, that's coming straight from our video on how to build a 5-bay compost system. And it looks as if we shot it for the book, because effectively we did. And so it's a cool little way to like compound the value of your content. We put out, a book without having to shoot as much.
That's super smart. How do you? I'm supposed to be wrapping up. I'm gonna sneak one last question in. We're starting to get way more media assets from a lot of the events that we do and things like that, and finding it a little more challenging to keep things organized. You have exponentially more content than we do on this. Are you organizing everything through just really good folders in Google Drive or Dropbox, or is there some kind of suite of tools and libraries, or a SaaS tool that helps you be able to manage it well, pull stuff out, and quickly get it into production?
Yeah, we just migrated over to ClickUp to help us manage a lot of our like flows, and then most of our stuff lives in nested folders in a Google Drive or Google Workspace. And so it'll be like videos, Epic Gardening, videos, Epic Homesteading, in progress, completed, like all that kind of stuff. And then it's also nice to have a team that's stuck around for quite some time. So our video editors have edited the last few hundred, right? So they can
Yeah.
pull B-roll from existing libraries really quickly without having to kind of reference stuff.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Epicgardening.com. Check it out. Kevin, this was a blast. Thank you so much. And yeah, man, I'm looking forward to continuing to follow your progress on this. You're doing amazing work.
Dude, thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah.